Oh, hello everyone. I couldn't see because of the lag on the video that we were actually on. I just want to welcome everyone to the Harvey B. Gantt Center's series of open air studio visits with artists, where we go into their studios virtually and talk to them about the underpinnings of their practice and their history of making art. Today, we're joined by Alexandria Smith, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to her. Um, I'm going to just take a moment and share Alexandria's bio with you, just to be official. Alexandria Smith is a mixed media visual artist based in London and New York. She earned her BFA in illustration from Syracuse University, an MA in art education from New York University, and an MFA in fine arts from Parsons, the New School for Design. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2018 to 2019 Queens Museum Jerome Foundation Fellowship, a Pollock Krasner Grant, the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture Fellowship, the Virginia A. Myers Fellowship at the University of Iowa, and the Fine Arts Work Center Fellowship. She has been awarded residencies including McDowell, Bemis, Yaddo, LMCC Process Space, and Alexandria is currently head of program painting at the Royal College of Art. I'd like to welcome you all. I'd like to welcome Alexandria Smith and welcome you all to our conversation. How are you, Alex?
I'm great. How you doing, Dexter?
I'm good. I'm good. I think that the internet was lagging a bit, and I wasn't quite sure if we were on, and I started like panicking, like going into the chat, like, "Are we okay?" But everything is okay. Everything is all right. So the one thing that I want to start off by saying is that the conversation we're having today is actually part of a series of conversations that the Gantt Center is presenting. Our talk today is sort of a follow-up on a conversation I had with Fahamu Peku some weeks ago. And then weeks before that, I had a great conversation with Mario Moore. And I'm just really pleased to be able to talk to such important and groundbreaking artists in this format. I know that the world is super crazy right now, so even taking the time to have this conversation means a lot to us. And I know that you're on an entirely different time zone than we are right now, and I can relate to that. So without further ado, I would love to talk to you a little bit about who you are and what you do. I've known you a long time, so I
Yes.
don't want to get too inside baseball too quickly. I want to kind of give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So when you go to a cocktail party and someone says, "Hey, uh, what do you do?" What's your answer to that question?
I definitely say I'm an artist, and then I follow that with I'm also an educator, in that order. And then the question after that is usually, "Oh, what kind of art do you make?" And that's when I usually stumble because, we always have these elevator spiels planned out, but every time I meet someone, I want to answer it differently.
You know,
So
why do you think that is?
I mean, because the way that I view my work and my perspective of my work is always changing as the work changes. So that 1 minute, one sentence elevator spiel doesn't always encapsulate my thoughts at the time, at the moment. And sometimes I also try to, play with words a bit and try to be more cryptic and less transparent.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that, but also let's talk about your background a bit. So, just kind of like the the basics. So, where were you born, and what was your pathway into becoming an artist? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I should have given you one of those slides of my journal entry that I always start my talks with. But I was born in the Bronx, raised in New Rochelle in Westchester, right outside of the Bronx. Um, do not come from an artist family, but I have two amazing, supportive parents that have always cultivated and supported my desire to be an artist, which my mom says I said I'm an artist at the age of 3. I have documentation from a journal entry from when I was 6 that says I'm an artiste, and I spelled it that way, Arties. So it's something that I've always known and always wanted to be, and I didn't know anything different. So that's, yeah, and I've just been really grateful to have family that supported me. My younger brother, they always come to my shows. My parents, my brother, they've always, you've met them a bunch of times over the years. So I'm really blessed to have had that support my whole life, even if they didn't understand what it meant to be an artist or what that even looked like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned over the years. I have met your parents a few times over the years because you and I have had the opportunity to work together on a number of different projects um, over the years, exhibitions I may have curated or things you were involved with. But so that means I met you in 2009. So
Yep.
that would be 11 years ago. It's amazing, amazing that
I
it's
was
been.
in grad school.
Yeah, yeah. So can I ask this question? What's the biggest difference between Alexandria Smith now and Alexandria Smith in 2009?
Wow. I knew you were going to ask me these really tough questions. I knew it was coming. I think the biggest difference is that I have a voice and I know how to use it. And I embrace my voice. And I didn't have one, or I didn't even know what it meant to have a voice in 2009 in the same way that I do now. And I think experience has definitely, years have just has definitely shown me that I have a voice and that it's important to use it, and not remain silent.
Yeah, and what would you say just about the idea of being an artist, not just you personally, but when I think about our encounter like 11 years ago,
Yeah.
I was just getting my start as a curator. Truth be told, as much as an artist back then might have thought that I was giving them an exhibition opportunity, they were actually giving me an opportunity, right? Like really, it was the other way around. No one knew that because I was just getting started too. So
Yeah.
the idea that you would be willing to be in a show that I'm organizing back then was as much of a leap of faith for
Yeah.
you me, and certainly a leap of faith for any of the museums or galleries you might have been doing these shows at. But also, what I want to talk about is this whole idea of being an artist, because I think that, I mean, you've talked about the difference between Alexandria Smith then and now, having a voice, knowing how to use it, knowing what having a voice even means. But even the idea of being an artist seems to be a very different thing now. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I think that being an artist today versus 10 years ago, Black artist, let's be
Yeah.
clear, being a Black artist today seems like a very different occupation than 10 years ago.
It does. I mean, I think that we finally given a platform that we've been fighting for, and it's not perfect, that platform, and we're still fighting, right? There's definitely a lot more work to be done, but I think the visibility of Black artists has increased tenfold. I mean, we could probably count on our hand how many artists, Black visual artists, were given a platform back in 2009 when we met. And now it's not about, oh, there's only one opportunity for one of us. It's like, oh, there's enough, and it's about abundance, and not about scarcity. And so we're seeing that.
Right, right. No, I think that's true. I mean, I remember, trying to get opportunities for Black artists back then and how challenging it was. And now, I won't say that there are no challenges, but now it feels like I have to caution people about what they shouldn't even get involved with because everyone's offering them things to do. And
Yeah.
they don't even know the difference between like what might be a good path or what might be a bad path. But speaking of paths, you've
Yeah.
been on a path, right?
Yeah.
So when I met you, I was living in Brooklyn. I think you were living in Brooklyn,
Living in
right?
Bed-Stuy. Yep.
Yeah, so we were both in Bed-Stuy. I'm in Bloomfield, New Jersey right now, and you're in London. So I moved a little bit. You moved a lot.
I did.
All right. So I mean, we're gonna talk a little bit more about what you're doing there later on. I don't want to get into that too much right now, but I do just want to like talk a moment about it. What the heck are you doing in London?
I am head of the painting department at the Royal College of Art, which is the one of the only postgraduate art institutions in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and running a program that's about to undergo some transitions. And I think the biggest one happened about 6 months ago, which I couldn't have ever anticipated. And really trying to really find a way to sort of bridge the gap between Europe, the art scene in Europe, and arts education in Europe and in the States, as well as try to find a new way of approaching how we educate or cultivate young artists in a master's degree postgraduate program, while also acknowledging what's happening in the world. I think that, so oftentimes arts institutions or academic art institutions haven't changed as much as they should have, and it's not a reflection of what's happening in the world. And so I'm here to try to shake things up and do that, and for the betterment of the students and the young people, and to make things more equitable and fair. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you think there are some real stark differences between arts education there and arts education in the States? And I know like you could only make an answer based upon your own personal experiences. So I'll put a little
yeah.
asterisk there. I mean, you're not answering the question for everybody, but in your experience, what would you say is sort of like the big difference?
I think the biggest difference, the states, we have I say we because I'm still in that mindset, right? In the states, there are classes, and oftentimes I find that as a student, students are fighting for time to make work, time to be in the studio, against versus having to attend classes. And in here, there aren't any classes actually. There are critiques, or what we call here tutorials, with a tutor or a professor that you're assigned for the entire year. So you have a couple of times that you meet with them per term, a couple of times you meet with the tutor and your tutor group. And there are no classes, so students have complete autonomy and freedom to be in the studio as often or as little as they like. And that is the starkest difference. They're taught in a way that mirrors the experience they'll have as artists, as professional artists when they leave here
Hmm.
in UK, and
Uh,
that's the biggest difference.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Talk about that a bit more. What I would really like to do is to take an opportunity to kind of get really specific about your practice and
Hmm.
kind of work you make.
Yeah.
I've seen you evolve over the years, and I know that you've always had, at least from my perception, always had this idea of where you wanted to go with your work, but maybe you didn't have the platform. You mentioned platform earlier, but
Yeah.
also sort of like the support system and the resources. And it seems
Yeah.
to me like those things are starting to come together in a different way. Like I know that recently you were an artist in residence at Next Haven.
Yeah. Yeah. Titus's new residency,
Right. I did
definitely.
the
That was
first
huge.
residency in New Haven, Connecticut. We could talk a
Hmm.
little bit about that as well during this discussion. But I know we have some of your work that we can show and discuss as well. So we're going to look at the first slide presentation now, which is work that was made prior to 2015.
Yes.
So the first thing I want to say about this, and when we go through this, because I know there's quite a lot of pieces we want to look at, is it's hard to tell scale, right? So some of the works I'm sure we're going to see are really large and some are quite compact. So if you don't have to say exactly the scale, but if you can say like generally, this is like, you can use your hands to
Yeah.
just give us some general idea because I think that helps, right? It helps a little bit in terms of understanding what you're looking
Hmm.
at. So material, scale, and just, you can speak briefly about the work, what's behind it, what are the underpinnings. So we can start with this piece here.
Yeah, I put this one in here because this is my very first collage that I made in 2012, I believe. And it wasn't, well, no, actually, I think it was more like 2011. So I just got out of grad school, just graduated from Parsons, and just was teaching full time. I was an art teacher at a middle school at that time in East Harlem. Actually, Promise Academy was where I was teaching, and utilized the school printer to print out my work. And I had a small apartment in Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy. Just mounted everything to the wall, and just something compelled me to cut out all these images. So this is actually a collage, paper collage, about 9 by 12, the size of like a type, copy paper. And it's my own, it's duplicates or printouts of paintings that I'd made up until that point. So that's when I just had this epiphany to start cutting everything up.
Mm,
And I'd always been fascinated by collage, excuse me, and it's still a huge component, or a significant component of my work now, even in the way that I paint. But this one I always start with because this was sort of that game changer for me, that had me really look at my work in a different way, like literally looking at my work and dissecting it and putting it back together and creating almost a remix version of the work I'd made up until that point. And so I wasn't as satisfied with my paintings then. We can go on to the next one, actually.
Forward.
And so I wasn't, I think I did that out of frustration because I wasn't having the kinds of conversations that I wanted to have in the studio
Mm,
with curators, gallerists, artists, and I just wasn't happy with those conversations around my paintings. So that's what sort of led me to really rethink what I was doing, and try to find a new language to work from. And
mm,
collage was it. It sort of upended the the familiarity of my paintings and this safe space, or not safe space, but this literal domestic space, and created a more surrealist, fantastical space, which is what I'd always been interested in, always gravitated towards, was fantasy, magical realism,
mhm,
science fiction.
mhm. But let's also like stopping here on this work, a very like elementary question.
Hmm.
What is it? What is this particular work about?
You know, Dexter, you know better than to ask me that question. Well, it's more so about, I have my own ideas, thoughts in mind that go into the work when I'm making it. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's happening intuitively and I don't have a plan. I'm just playing, I'm experimenting. And at that time when I was making this work, we're going way back here, like eight plus years, I was creating these hybrid characters that, excuse me, sort of felt like they were straight out of a myth, folk tale. And there was a narrative that was happening, but the narrative wasn't complete within the picture frame. There was something always happening outside of the frame, just that was equally as important as what was happening within the frame. And so I guess as an artist, I was playing the role of the trickster, but then the characters in the work are also tricksters too,
Mm,
because you can't really place them. They have multiple limbs. Um, they don't feel whole, but yet off, most of the time they are complete figures, right? But they're still this hybrid amalgamation of different things and genders and body parts.
Like in this
So
particular work here,
yeah.
like I see that, this central figure has multiple limbs, but apparently no head, or perhaps I'm not reading it correctly, but that's what I sort of sense there.
Yeah. And it's called Go Run Tell Dat. So that's Martin Lawrence had a whole special called Go Run Tell Dat. And it's a common, a colloquialism or phrase used in African American, African Americans use that phrase. And so thinking back on it now, my interpretation of it is different now than it was then. But
Mhm,
it is about this figure running, there's pointing happening. And I like for people that are looking at the work to really pick it apart themselves. There's no answer. We all have our own experiences and definitions that we bring to work, to artwork, and it's really about unpacking that. And that's just as equally as interesting to me as it is what I'm thinking about,
mhm.
and more interesting, honestly, sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I think we have more work in this series, so we can move on to the next one so we don't get too tight on time.
Yeah, so then this one became, this is a painting, large scale painting, about 4 feet by 4 feet.
Mhm,
And I started to then take those collages and I brought them back into the paintings. Sometimes the collages they're complete and they are whole objects and independent, but they also became sort of the blueprints for painting. So I'd bring those figures from the collages into the paintings. And this is one of those instances where I did that. And this one is called Procession to the Rooting Place.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
but for me, collage, painting, later you'll see sculpture, installation, all of that work is sometimes happening concurrently. They're all happening simultaneously. It's the way that I engage my body that's really integral to the work. It's working and using my body, working on a micro scale, on a macro scale, engaging my entire body engaging different parts of my body, and I really enjoy that. And I don't ever think I'll step away from painting, but painting can look like and will look like different things. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting to me because I'm thinking back to what you're saying about like your earlier paintings and the conversations you were having with people about them, or But here's the thing, like from my view, and having been sort of moving through the art world simultaneously with you, right? Like is
yeah.
sort of like there's certainly a certain amount of connectivity there in terms of our timeline being in this, right?
Hmm.
I curated my first museum show when you were getting out of grad school. Just so happened that you were in that show and it was your first museum show. So there's a lot of like parallel in terms
Hmm.
of the journey through here. And I happen to think that painting has always been important, but 8 to 10 years ago, people were less interested in figurative painting as far as the market goes. And now, because there was a lot of interest in abstraction,
Yeah.
and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but I think that, and I say this to artists often, if you keep doing what you're most passionate about and what you're most driven to do, the world will eventually catch up to you and figure,
Yeah.
like the times will converge again, because the kind of work you were doing back then is the kind of work that I see a lot of artists attempting to do now.
And to add to that, Dexter, I'll never forget. You came to my studio when I had my studio on Grand Street in
Mm-hmm.
not what was that? Bushwick. That was in Bushwick, yeah. And you said, it's going to take you leaving New York and your work being recognized outside of New York for New York to recognize it, because New York is more conservative than people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I left and went to Boston, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the opportunities did come, but I stuck to my guns. And I think that there is a certain expectation around figurative painting, towards black artists that are making figurative painting, that is still very much on trend in many ways, and isn't as open to experimentation as I think it should be. And I
Mm-hmm.
think many black artists, we just get pigeonholed into making this very particular type of work. Or if it's figuration, it has to look like portraiture, and it has to resemble, or be a likeness, create a likeness of someone.
Yeah, that's really true. The work that we're looking at now is actually a work that was on view at the Harvey Gantt Center in the most recent show that I organized there. Painting is His Own Country,
Hmm.
and then we had a question come in, and this is an interesting kind of technical question. And the question is, would you say as a painter, perhaps even just generally as an artist, but would you say that you're interested in breaking the visual plane, like when you're making work?
Oh, definitely.
And could you speak just for a moment about even what that question means to you?
That's a great question. Breaking the visual plane to me, means that I guess I'm interpreting as it is, am I interested in disrupting sort of the linear, or disrupting the, I mean, I understand it now. I'm trying to interpret it and give the definition and explain. I am interested in breaking the visual plane, and it is about not just the reading of what's directly in front of you. It's about trying to create greater depth, trying to force you to look beyond what's central in the painting. So definitely part of, I mean, and that's why I was saying, like, I still approach painting in a very, with like a collage aesthetic. I mean, this is a big piece. This is probably, if I recall, about 5 feet by 50 by 60 inches, about 5 feet by 5.5 or 6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it is mixed media. So this red part, of the figure is textured and it's built up, and then the extremities are collaged, like wallpaper, contact paper, and the entire black background is black glitter, which is something that was really prevalent in my work post pre 2015. And
And
so using those techniques, in that media is one way that I do try to disrupt, or break up the visual plane, to answer that question, to sort
I
of
think,
create this unnerving sense of space within the viewer as they're looking at the work.
yeah, I think you said something to me once, and maybe I hope I'm recalling correctly, but a lot of your work seems to be that if I'm looking at, say, a painting or a collage, it's very much about what's going on in the periphery. like I'm seeing either a reaction to something that's happening, let's say off screen, off
Hmm.
something that's taking place in another part of the room, and I'm seeing the central figure respond to that. It seems in some regards, or
Definitely.
some trauma that has occurred, and then it's up to me, the viewer, to sort of use my own imagination to figure out what I'm looking at, like what's the byproduct of what has occurred, right?
Exactly. I definitely said that to you. That was the sort of theme and concept of my work pre 2015 for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
How many more works do we have in this particular series? Because I don't want to miss anything. Maybe we'll proceed. So is jumping into the next, if I'm not mistaken?
This is still 20 pre. This is the one of the last two. There are about two
Okay,
more after
great,
this one
great.
and one other one. So
So
this
let's
is
talk
when I
about
was,
this work.
yeah, taking my collages and making them. I wanted to make them more immersive. I wanted the collages to feel like the big paintings that I wanted to make. So this is 11 by 15 feet, and so I started making these what I called collage installations. So they were, this is like printmaking is thrown in there, different printmaking techniques, digital printing, drawing, and it's on paper and canvas, some of it, and collage directly, mounted directly onto the wall. And
Let me
so
tell you
this
why I
one,
like this work so much. I'm sorry to interrupt you,
that's okay. Go ahead.
but I think that like this work to me, um, how can I put this? It feels like you took a huge risk, like a huge risk, because you kind of threw, you kind of threw, pardon the pun, it's like you threw out the baby and the bathwater. Like you basically went out on a limb, because I never saw you do anything like this. I mean, to make a large scale wall installation, or let's say collage, that is primarily like water. I'm reading it as water, and almost drowning your own, like protagonists. The Marjorie, the other figures that we've kind of like grown to kind of know are
Yeah.
yours, and to see them sort of immersed in this violent sea, it's like it's poetic in a way, and I don't know if that was your intent, but I read this as like, like shaking it up, like that was like a turning point where you're like, I'm just going to shake it up and not be afraid to make a difference. Let's put it this way, to put it simply, a lot of artists are afraid to change,
Yeah.
right? And I know why, but it was like you took a pivot and said, I'm just going to shake it up, I'm just going to do something completely different.
Yeah, the world was shaken up around that time, and I was just trying to do some quick Googling. If I'm not mistaken, I think I made this after Trayvon Martin was killed.
Hmm.
And I was far away at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts at a residency, and I just was that was probably the most alone and hardest experience I've had at a residency. So it makes sense that, I mean, this is called the deluge, because this piece is definitely a reflection of what I was feeling after Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a drowning. It's also, water is incredibly powerful. It's renewal, it's destruction, it's all the things that we yearn for and fear, and it's, simultaneously. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think I just felt like, let me just go crazy and try something different.
right, right. I think we have a couple
Mhm.
more. Oh, this is beautiful. So we
Thank
can
you.
spend a moment here, and then I have some more questions that I'd love to throw your way. But I love this because now we get to see the work in situ, and you get a real sense of the depth and a real sense of scale. And I
Yeah.
actually have never seen this work in person. Um,
Yeah. This
yeah.
is the biggest one I've ever made. 10 by 40 feet, if I remember correctly. This is at the Union for Contemporary Art, an incredible art space in Omaha, Nebraska, that was founded and is run by Brigitte McQueen Shue, who decided who was friends with an amazing artist, pretty well known printmaker Wanda Ewing, who was pretty well known in Omaha and taught at the University of Nebraska. And so Brigitte has always been an appreciator, lover of the arts, and wanted to bring the arts to the North Omaha community, the Black community in Omaha. And fundraised and created this incredible space that's not just a gallery, it's also a printmaking studio, a dark room, clay, ceramic studio. There's artists in residence that are from the community that are in residence every year, and a fabric, textile studio. I mean, it's incredible. And so I was the first. I inaugurated the space as the first artist, Wanda Ewing, artist in residence, and so I was commissioned to make this piece. And in this piece, I basically saw similarities between my work and Wanda Ewing's work. I couldn't believe I'd never heard of her before, and she's amazing and worth looking up. For those of you that are watching, and she had these figures. These black figures were very, she would use these black figures in her work and reimagining iconic like Western paintings. And that at the time, this is something that I'd been doing. I was sort of using the compositions of these European white men and reappropriating, remixing them to place black women, black figures in them. And that's what she did. So I thought it made sense to just sort of combine her work and mine as a sort of celebratory reimagining of both The Bathers by Cezanne, if I'm not mistaken, and Luncheon on the Grass by, testing my art history here, Manet, I believe, or yeah. If I remember
I'm gonna let
correctly.
you have that one.
Yeah, forgive
But,
me.
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. A few things you said that really strike me. One, so let's talk about Omaha for a minute, right? So I've only been to Omaha once, and another parallel, I was invited there by Bemis Contemporary
Yeah.
Art Center, and you were a resident in Bemis recently. I think you were artist in
I
residence.
was in 2018, yep.
18.
And this was done in 2017.
Okay, so I think I was in Omaha the one and only time, maybe around the same time, but you weren't there when I was there. That's for sure.
Mhm.
And I left that city trying to control my enthusiasm about the types of things that one could do in these types of places where you don't necessarily think of art when you think of Omaha.
Yeah.
You think of art when you think of a lot of places that aren't like these art centers in the
Mhm.
country or the world. And I just always try to remind people, like, if you want to opportunities, sometimes you have to go to places where you can create your own opportunities, and that's, like, build your own thing, right, someplace.
Yes.
And then the other thing is, I don't think, and I love the fact that you were using, collaborating with another artist, remixing and mixing your work. I don't think enough artists do that. I mean, I kind of have a sense that from a sales and marketing standpoint, it's kind of difficult for a gallery to get their head around that. But I say, put that aside. I
Yeah.
think that more artists should collaborate on making actual work together. Like,
Yeah.
that, to me, that's just a huge missed opportunity that I think so many artists have, right?
I agree.
Hey, Warhol and Basquiat did it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so
Definitely.
can't be that bad.
And I will say that Wanda Ewing passed away from cancer. So I was doing this, she's no longer living. But with the blessing of her family and with Brigitte, her blessing, who was her best friend when she was alive. So I will say that as a caveat.
But even still, right? This idea
Yeah.
that, I mean, you obviously, I'm not, and again, I'm not talking about appropriating someone's work just like willy-nilly,
Yeah.
just you could, like, take pieces of, like, someone's work. I don't even need to use an example, but take a piece of
Yeah.
someone's work and just throw it into your work and be like, ta-da, remix. I'm talking about artists sitting down with one another, sharing their vision, and saying, look, this year, why don't we make 2 or 3 pieces together and see what
Mhm.
that looks like, and have co-ownership of that, and
Yeah.
see how the world reacts to that kind of collaboration. I think those are opportunities. But okay, so I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. I think
No,
that's
that's something I'm gonna do though, with some artists friends. Yeah. So I agree.
it's kind of akin to the idea of artists trading work in some regards, right? Like,
Yeah.
right, because I hear more and more young artists, youngish. I don't even know, using the word young is so funny right now. I don't even know what that means anymore. But so many young artists talking about trading work, which
Hmm.
leads me into the next thing I want to talk to you about. And, and it's sort of like the economics of the art world, right? And like what, this moment in time is like being an artist. existing, right? Like existing. I mean, you're at, you're teaching at a school now, you're head of a department. So that's a different kind of position to be in, some stability, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
At this moment in time, being an artist, can you just talk like, because you have a lot of friends who are artists, right?
Mhm.
So without naming their names, maybe talk a little bit about like what is the current challenge of being an artist today? And not just a Black artist, but just an artist attempting to exist and make a living as an artist.
The current challenge of being an artist today is, I mean, in this post COVID world, it's trying to find stability that will still provide you with the resources you need to make your work, but that won't take you out of your studio too much. Right? It's a balance. I think had this conversation with an artist friend of mine a year or so ago, and we were both saying like the very thing that allows us to be in the studio, which is teaching, also is the same thing that takes us out of the studio, and that's the struggle. It's trying to find that balance, but it's also about trying to adjust to and recognize what you need as an artist, as a person, as a human, and finding a happy medium. And so I think the biggest challenge is stability.
Mm,
I think that's always been the biggest challenge is how do you find stability and how do you continue to be resilient when things are unstable like they are right now. Um, what
yeah.
is it? How do you sort of pivot and use your resources to do other things to allow you to accomplish other things and sustain a livelihood that may not mean that you're actually in the studio, but you're still using those skills that you've acquired over the years
Mm,
so that you can provide and create some sort of stability where there is none. And stability doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about on a grandiose scale. I'm not talking about, oh, I need to have $3,000 by the end of this year. I'm talking about like what is the stability in your daily routine, stability in how you're taking care of yourself and resting, right? Because that's also incredibly important is rest and taking time out for self and not always hustling, going, 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 because that's just going to burn you out.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I definitely, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, this idea of balancing some other sort of form of income and balancing that with the studio practice is just one of those balancing acts that's really difficult to master.
Yeah.
And I think that teaching can be draining, emotionally draining.
Especially right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, right now it's like everything is just like amplified. I mean, my 4 and 5 year old are like doing school on the internet, which is sort of like has me feeling like that old man, like get off the internet, like. Um,
Yeah, it's really
but
hard.
but not to segue too much. I want to just kind of hear a little bit about London. Right.
Yeah.
Like what's I've been to London a few times, thankfully, before this pandemic, I got
Mhm.
that travel in, right? Like over the years.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, like what's London like for you?
It's exciting.
COVID, pre-pandemic.
Pre-COVID, okay. I
Like,
had about
right, because like talking about it now is probably just like talking about any place else, right? But
exactly.
prior to that.
Yeah, so I came to London in August of last year, so I've been here now a year, and I was able to experience London for about 6 months before everything went to, went in the trash. But I will say that it's refreshing and it's exciting. Um, I definitely am inspired by locale, and this is why I've done so many residencies because that's how I get that excitement going and that those juices flowing. And having this opportunity to do something different and to challenge myself as both an artist and as an educator was something that I couldn't pass up. And being, youngish enough to be able to take that on and not have to uproot too many people to do so. But it is really exciting. I think that the London art scene is very different than New York.
In what way?
Um, there's, I'm probably going to be, yeah, I'm probably going to receive some some mail after this or text messages.
Oh, you mean the comments I was talking about before? You're gonna get some comments?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna get some comments. I can't see any comments here though, but I know I'll get some in my DMs or something. But I think it's more exciting and more experimental in a way that leaves the art scene at the door, if that makes sense.
Huh.
It's not as influenced by. I'm not saying that artists in the States aren't making incredible work. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm just saying that the art scene here does not have the same sort of impact on the artist's production as it does in the States.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So so things are feel much more refreshing and just unique because of that you don't have that cloud over your head.
Mm,
You don't feel that cloud.
mm, mm.
And
Yeah,
maybe that's just because I haven't been here long enough and showing enough here, but that's just my initial impression. So those of you watching, don't please don't come for me.
but speaking of but speaking of COVID and the
Mhm.
pandemic, which is like the elephant in the room that is just inescapable.
Yeah,
Um, I know that you were also making work, during that time.
barely, but yes. Yeah,
Um, and I know that we have some other work that we can look at, and I would love to jump to that. Sort of like
yes,
see where we are in the view of works.
yeah.
So, let's just go through these works, and you can just tell us a minute about each of these pieces.
Yeah, I think this is the first painting I made as I would say the pandemic was creeping in. This was late February, early March when I made this, if I remember correctly. So it was like we were hearing about it. It was coming, but it hadn't arrived. And I made this. I mean, this was made in a few hours, which is not something I usually do. But I started making another painting that was more planned. It didn't work out. I wiped it away, and then this came out. So I think in many ways this captures that like energy and intuitiveness that I feel like I capture in my drawings, but don't always isn't always reflected in my paintings because they are more prescriptive to a certain extent. So this was the first one, and I think it's very foreboding. I mean, you've there's so much going on in it that, and it's about 30, 30 by 30 inches or so.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
A lot more black in your work. We can go to the next one. I see a lot more black emerging in your work. Obviously, this just contradicts what I just said, but I do see that. We can talk about that later. Let's talk about this piece here.
Yeah. So I didn't start making work right away. I made that painting and then everything, we were sheltering in place and I knew it was coming. So my partner and I were planning for that because it happened in the States first. So we're in tune. So we were getting ready and everything at work was crazy. And so I just took a break. I just said, I can't even function. I don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. I'm happy one day or 1 hour and then the next minute I'm crying and then I'm terrified and it's just every emotion you can think of
Right,
happening on a daily basis.
right.
And I wasn't and everything was canceled and I was actually relieved.
Mm,
I was honestly relieved because I think I had said yes to too many things at that point.
mm, mm.
And
Can we talk
not that
about that
I'm
for a moment?
what's that?
Can we talk about that for a moment? Saying
Yes.
yes to too many things. For all the artists that are watching this now and in the future, we're going to give you a minute or so on this conversation about saying yes to too many things. I said no to something earlier today, which is uncharacteristic of me.
Mm,
I try to be super supportive of people and their projects, but then it just became abundantly clear to me when I got that email this morning. I was like, I just can't take it. I just can't take it
yeah.
on. So what does that mean for you? Like not saying yes or saying yes to too many things?
I know when I came here to London, one of the fears that I had was this fear of disappearing, which I think we all feel to a certain extent.
Mm,
This fear of, oddly enough, like you being forgotten as if the work that you've made and the impact you've made on people, not just the work, but the person you are, is just going to up and poof and disappear. But I think that was sort of in the back of my mind coming here, making this big leap into to a country that where I didn't know anyone. I actually know one artist here. Now I know more, but I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any connection to London. So I was saying yes to everything to keep my connection to the States going and the familiarity in the art world that I knew, still, keep my pulse on that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be able to do it because anytime I say yes to too many things, yes, I can do it. But what would have happened to me after that? I'm afraid to. I don't want to know. So once I realized why I was saying yes, and I realized what was happening, and then COVID happened, and I was able to make a decision about postponing things or canceling things, and I said cancel everything except for my show that's coming up next year at the Courier Museum.
Mm-hmm.
But what that did was gave me more time to actually put in the research and the work that I really want to do, and requires time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have more time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's just realizing that I'm only one person. I don't have studio assistants helping me make my work. I don't have that sort of those sort of resources, and I just had to take a moment to recognize that I was biting off more than I could chew or needed to
Right,
chew. And
right,
it
right.
was
Well,
okay to
and
slow down.
no, no, I know it. I know it well. So I know we're getting down to like the last like 11 minutes or so, and I
That
still
was
got a lot
fast.
I want to talk to you about and a lot to say.
Yeah.
So I know it goes by fast, doesn't it? So let's move to the next piece. But I want to. Here's what I want to say. Two things. One, that fear of, and again, I'm talking to the artists that may be tuning into this or maybe tune into it later. Um, that fear that you might have of disappearing, poof, if you leave your hometown, doesn't matter what that hometown is, right? Like, and go somewhere else. I think you should just let it go. Let that fear go, because I have from experience and observation an entirely different theory. And my theory is that it is complete reverse of what you think. In fact, you know how when you look at something that's close to you, it looks larger. When you look at something that's far away, it looks smaller, and it's like
Mhm.
perspective. And
Yeah.
maybe that's not the right terminology, but I believe perspective is the terminology, right? Perspective. I think when you leave where you're from and you go farther away, you appear larger.
Mm,
That has been my experience.
that's deep. I love that. I
And
love.
the reason that is that all those people who know you have a very sort of specific perspective of who they think you are and what you do. And the moment you leave and they no longer know what you're up to and they only hear about it, they
Yeah.
only read about it, you just become larger and larger because basically now you only exist in their imagination.
Hmm.
Let's move on.
Yeah. um, but slowing down for me, just to go, I no, I love that analogy. But slowing down for me meant returning to what I consider my roots, which is drawing, and that's what I've been doing. And there's some that are omitted from here that are pretty significant. Some large scale, or one large scale drawing that I made for the first time in a long time. And you're familiar with the drawings I used to make, but then that was what, 2012 at Broadway Gallery was probably the last time
Mhm, mhm,
when you showed my work in that two-person exhibition. That was the last time I had made those drawings.
mhm, mhm.
So 8 years later, I'm now making large scale drawings in color again. So that, I think it's on my website, but we
Yeah,
can.
yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely would encourage everyone to check out your site. Let's move to the next work.
Hmm. I think that's the last one of the COVID series, but we can go to the post 2015 images
Oh,
since
that,
they're more inspo shot.
that is. I think that is the very last one.
Yeah.
That's the very last one. So let's talk a little bit about the future, right? So do you see? I mean, I'm not going to ask you a question like, do you see yourself at Royal College for a long? Like, I'm not going to ask.
Don't put me on the spot like that.
Hey, do you plan on sticking around at that job? No. What I'm really talking about is what are some of your ambitions? I mean, and again, let's try to talk about things outside of the context of this current pandemic because I think
Yeah,
that has a way of sort of almost making everyone's answer the same.
exactly. No, I know what you mean. I've really been, so one of the some of the images that maybe we could jump to of that 20 post 2015 work, just as I'm talking.
Sure, sure, sure.
And the Queen's Museum show really exhibition and installation that I made really did set things into motion. It's probably image number 4.
Sure. Want to go forward
I think, no, we want to go backwards.
or backwards? Okay.
Yeah,
Say stop when.
it should be number 4. It's the black glitter walls, and there it is.
There
Okay,
it is.
so there are about 4 images of this, but this show in particular really did set my thoughts and all this research and passion that I have for illuminating Black women's stories
Mm,
and trying to find a way to connect that desire and passion that I have to the work that I'm making. And this was sort of that big opportunity, big platform, and I took a huge risk and did something I've never done, which is create an installation for my first solo museum show in like and I had to do it in like 3 or 4 months. It's insane, and it came together. But it really has set into motion this body of work around illuminating this, or combining fiction and biography and nonfiction with creating immersive spaces that honor the lives of Black women whose stories have been erased or who are unknown. And that's a fusion of, talking to members of the community of those spaces, but using the African burial grounds as a departure point to explore those narratives. So it's not about telling this story from cover to cover. It's
mhm,
about what it means to have stories from the past, stories from the present, and then imagining a future come together in a space that is for us, for Black people, for Black women, and that is about us. So
mhm,
this is this like lifelong body of work that I'm continuing, in an iteration of it, not anything similar, but an iteration of this project and this research will another iteration will occur next year in July at the Currier Museum, and it will look completely different. But the foundation is the same. It's like looking at the African burial ground in that state, or in that city, meeting with members of the community, having these conversations, these interviews, discussions to try to figure out how I can create this space that is immersive, that utilizes, also incorporates sound. So what you're not hearing is an original composition that Liz Gray made for this exhibition that really does bring it all together, and it's jarring. It like hits you in your soul, in your core. And so we're collaborating as well on this next exhibition at the Courier. So that's happening while I'm still trying to answer the question that I've been trying to answer since grad school, and
what's
from
that?
which is, how do I bring the energy of my drawings into my paintings? I
Mm,
feel like that question has reemerged, and
mm,
it's driving me crazy. And it's probably because all I've been doing is drawing at this point,
mm,
in the
mm.
last 4 months or so.
So we are down to the final 5, and I'm going to do something that you are not prepared for. Uh, okay,
Ooh.
can we just we can close the slideshow and focus on Alex. So typically with open air, we ask the artists to take us around your studio, and we would have looked at their
Mm-hmm.
space and kind of whatever. But we're not doing that with you. But you are sitting in front of your books,
Ooh, yes.
and I know it's not an accident. You know, I sit in front of my books too. We all like to look smart,
Yeah. I have a problem here. I have a
but
problem that my wife is gonna kill me for, all these books.
but this seems like a very thoughtful collection of books, and we certainly don't have time to go through much of what's behind you. But
Yeah.
could you take a moment and talk about some highlights of what you're reading? Because I know that your work is very informed by literature.
Definitely. So, Noah Davis's catalog finally arrived last week to London. I had to wait a little bit longer than you all. That show has changed me forever. The show that he had at David's Werner, that I saw multiple times, and actually part of the reason I traveled to New York around that time was to see the show. Of course, to see family and friends, but this was an added incentive, and it brought me to tears. So I'm flipping through that slowly. Um, we've decided to use the bookshelf as sort of an homage to the now ancestors that have really inspired our practices. So Blacks by Gwendolyn Brooks was a major text that we used when trying to come up with the sound piece, and that inspired the Queens Museum exhibition. Reading Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saadia Hartman, who's not an ancestor, knock on wood, but that's a really important book for me right now. Zami inspired me when I was, where am I going? In college. um, what else is up here? You know,
But
Black
Prince is behind you.
Panther.
Prince is
Prince.
on the side.
Prince has forever and will forever change me. Audre Lorde, Zora Neale Hurston, The Bluest Eye. That's been sort of my go-to text. So I'm actually reading the books that I'm reading. This computer is stacked on, which I'm reading Afro Pessimism.
I heard about that book and I have not read it.
Yeah, take your time with it. So I'm reading Afro Pessimism. What else is under here? Um, and Freedom Dreams, Robin D.G. Kelly. And then the fiction that I'm reading, I just finished the Parable series by Octavia Butler, who's another favorite of mine. And I was in a reading group with a bunch of artists, book club, sort of rereading that and being terrified because she was a prophet. I mean, it's happening. That series of books is happening now to us in this world. And so I just finished that, but I picked up Lovecraft Country because I'm watching the TV show, and I was like, I always think the books are better,
Right.
but I'm actually like, nope. The show, I'd read the book that the show that Misha Green recreated for it, but it's a good book.
Right.
So yeah, that's
No, that's great. I mean,
a
that's
lot on here.
I mean, this is a fantastic conversation, and this conversation lives on beyond, beyond us. And I'm just excited that we were able to capture this moment in time. We've
Definitely.
known each other a little more than a decade, and this is the first time in a long time I've had an opportunity to talk with you in such
Yeah.
depth. I'm so excited about your future, being there in London, and on the other side of this pandemic. I'm quite sure when you're able to get back out and get into the thick of things, it's going to have a profound impact on your work as an artist.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like really really great to see you, and so I just want to thank you.
Likewise.
And look forward to connecting with you the next time there's an opportunity on the other side of this pandemic.
Definitely. I'm so glad to talk to you too, Dexter, and thank you to the Gantt Center for having both of us because we haven't talked in not in this way in at least 5+ years.
Right,
So
right,
it's really nice to have this conversation with someone that you've supported and followed my career since the beginning.
right,
When I
right.
was lugging that wood panel over my head and throughout my back, and on the train with this painting to deliver to Mokata in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And I don't know if you ever knew that story.
Gotta do what you gotta do. So anyway, on that note, we'll end there and just say congratulations on everything, and everyone listening. Support the Gantt Center so we can continue doing these kinds of talks, giving artists platforms to tell their story, to show their work, and looking forward to seeing you at the next open air. We'll be making an announcement about who the artist is very, very soon, and stay tuned.
Thank you.